Number 10. Rareness of new characters. With the exception of a few, many of the characters we've seen in these games seem to be continuously connected back to the lore of the Aftons. A lot of the humanoid characters in the games that aren't the Aftons simply tend to be their victims in some way. This means that either Gregory is going to be some kind of victim of theirs, or is actually somehow related to the Aftons. More than likely, at least based on what we've seen already. Of course, the same could be said for other new characters, or character, Vanessa and Vanny. Assuming, of course, like I said, that they are the same person. Then I guess they're a character. However, it is possible that Gregory will be neither and will simply become a new protagonist separate from the status quo, without him being a full-on murdered victim and without him being related to the Aftons in any way. Like I said though, it is surprisingly rare in the games for us to have a character who has both no connection and doesn't end up somehow hurt or murdered by William, so some people get a little bit of both. Number 9. Freddy and Friends on Tour, Episode 3. We see another connection to the crying child with the third episode of Freddy and Friends on Tour. Almost every episode seems to have some kind of connection to the games in terms of their location, and with episode 3 it almost appears as though the animatronics antics are going on within the house that we see in FNAF 4. The painting at the end of the corridor they run around in, the purple flowers in the vase, and the windows above the doors all evoke some of the feel and look of that house that we see in FNAF 4. This house is believed to be the Afton house, with both Crying Child and his sister Elizabeth each seeming to have bedrooms in this house. Freddy and Friends was created to help tease the release date and contents of Security Breach. So is it possible that this episode is teasing a connection to FNAF 4? And could that connection lie with Gregory? And friends, before we move on to our next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to hear more crazy outlandish theories from our brains, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. You know Connor and I have those theories for you, and our wild brains. Number 8. Glamrock Freddy. One hint that Gregory might actually be Crying Child could come from the story and mechanics that we know about in Security Breach. I don't know if you've noticed, but the coloring of Glamrock Freddy actually seems to be closer to Golden Freddy than Freddy Fazbear himself. And what do we know about Gregory and Glamrock Freddy in the games? Well, we know the two team up and that Gregory even hides himself within Glamrock Freddy, perhaps foreshadowing or mirroring the possession or connection between Golden Freddy and Crying Child, who is believed to be one of, if not the spirit that haunts that animatronic. I'm not saying that this is hard evidence or anything of Gregory being Crying Child, but the subtle similarities between the two seems to suggest that Gregory hiding in Glamrock Freddy could be a nod to CC and likely could be a hint at their connection. Number 7. It's complicated. One theory fans have is that regardless of time travel being around or not, lore will get a heck of a lot more complex with this new installment of the franchise. After all, this seems like it will be the biggest game yet, so we are expecting a lot of twists and turns throughout it. There's also the fact that at this point the lore is already so complex, with 9 survival horror games already existing and involving a collection of mainstay characters. It seems as though every time we are ready to retire someone or end the story, there is another addition that comes along. Hopefully this game will learn from that and instead give us some kind of partial ending and new beginning so that it can stop being so confusing as to who is alive and who is dead for reals. So a lot of people that we think are alive or that we think are dead, and then later we're like, oh, actually they lived. Okay. Number 6. Kidnapped. This point actually comes out of something I've been pondering on for a while. While initially deep diving into the FNAF security logbook, I had a couple of theories. One was that Crying Child could be Michael Afton, and that Michael perhaps was brainwashed to forget who he was before, or, forgot due to brain damage. Crying Child therefore didn't really die, but survived and became Michael in some way. My other theory though was that Crying Child was never really William's child, but instead was kidnapped and brainwashed into thinking he was William's child. In fact, at the time, I thought it would actually make more sense if this were true for all of his children, which in that case could mean that both my theories were true, and Crying Child was kidnapped, brainwashed, seemingly died in the bite of 83, and then was re-brainwashed or reprogrammed to believe he was Michael. So we kinda got like a reset? If Crying Child was taken, then what if what we are seeing in Security Breach is that incident? As I said previously, I know we are being led to think this game takes place in the modern day, But what if we were wrong? What if these are somehow events that come before the bite of 83 and the missing children incident that we believe was in 1985? Is it possible? And if so, will Gregory turn out to be the child who goes on to become perhaps Crying Child and later Michael? This could be the incident where Gregory gets taken away and then becomes someone new. Of course, how is Vanny in the game? I feel like that's going to be a question people are going to have, and I don't know. Time travel. I'm not sure what's happening there. Number 5. The Foxy Upgrade. Some fans believe that the other animatronics in the game can only run because they received what is referred to as a Foxy Upgrade. After all, in FNAF 1 and even throughout the franchise, Foxy has really been the only animatronic that has been known for moving super quickly and simply just sprinting towards you. Some even believed that this was simply because Foxy was running to try and save you or check up on you, hence the urgency in their movement. But Scott Cawthon, of course, dismissed that theory. We were all like, Foxy's our friend! And Scott was like, not your friend, nope. Foxy's sprint mechanic makes them unique and also at times one of the most shocking and frightening animatronics to be jump scared by in-game. Imagine how much scarier Security Breach will be if all animatronics can run and sprint as fast as Foxy. And from the trailer, it looks like they'll be able to. Whether or not this is an upgrade from Foxy or elsewhere, it seems this is an ability that will be common. Number 4. FNAF 4 Protagonist. Something that is very interesting is that we don't really see many other child protagonists in the Five Nights at Freddy's games. Despite this whole franchise really appealing to a younger audience, many of the protagonists we play as are adults or young adults. There has only been one other time we played even as a child protagonist, and that was during FNAF 4. Do you know who that protagonist was? I mean, you're here watching this video and we've talked up to this point, so I assume you do. It was Crying Child. Yep, it was Crying Child. Considering there was only ever one other child protagonist we got to play as, it seems likely that this time around, where we once again play as a child, that we could be playing as the same child from FNAF 4. Now, if that's the case, it would mean that Gregory is the Crying Child. Of course, they could be two separate child protagonists, but just saying it's really rare. Number 3. Bonnie in Freddy and Friends. Bonnie is the main character advertised on the thumbnail for Freddy and Friends on Tour Episode 3. If you haven't seen these short, less than 2-minute cartoon episodes up on Steel Wool Studios' YouTube channel, then you need to go do that. They are repetitive and ridiculous, but they also have tons of clues for those eager FNAF fans who are awaiting Security Breach's release. Like me, like you. In episode 3, we get purple glitches that appear to resemble the Purple Man at first glance. However, the fact that these glitches seem to primarily happen around Bonnie, who also glitches out almost the entire time while communicating, or rather staring at Foxy, seems to indicate that Bonnie, who is notably absent from the trailer, could be the next host animatronic for William Afton, aka Glitchtrap. Number 2. Recurring. Just think about all the other games in the franchise. Many characters are recurring, and we've played as the same protagonist before in this series. In both FNAF 1 and FNAF 5 Sister Location, we play as Michael Afton, or at least we appear to be playing as Michael Afton anyways. And in FNAF 3, there are many people that believe we are still playing as Michael in that game, although it's not really confirmed. The fact that recurring characters and protagonists are a thing in this world also seems to suggest that this could be the case this time around. And like I said, we've only seen one other child protagonist, so CC, is it you? Number 1. Similar appearance. So the look of Gregory and Crying Child isn't a one-for-one by any means, but they do have similarities when it comes to their appearance. Namely, they have the same hair color. I mean, also we don't really know Crying Child's eye color, but they also seem to have the same eye color. They both have dark eyes. Gregory has brown eyes. Crying Child has black eyes, I guess. Not really a thing, so I assume they're supposed to be brown. Also, while we haven't gotten a great look at Gregory's outfit via the trailers, some fans have taken to drawing him with 2 stripes on his shirt, which would also make him resemble Crying Child. We don't know if he's got 2 stripes on his shirt, and in fact it seems unlikely just based on what we've seen of him, but he could end up having those stripes, and if he did, that would be another similarity. We'll likely even see Gregory cry in-game, as everything that appears to be happening to him is really scary, so there could also be that as well when it comes to his appearance. appearance.
Starting with FNAF 4 in 1983. So the timeline starts off with not FNAF 2 like I've been thinking, but rather with FNAF 4. FNAF 4 takes place in 1983 as we see from the Fredbear and Fred's cartoon on the TV in Crying Child's house, which is already weird because of the lead up to Security Breach, but that's a whole other can of worms. At this point in the timeline though, William has already built the Springlock animatronics and the Funtime animatronics, since Elizabeth had already been gotten by Circus Baby. That is seemingly the only explanation we have for the stomach mounds on the Nightmare animatronics. So even before the first game starts, a Fazbear location closed down, and probably the local one, so William opened up Circus Babies to keep up his killing spree. And then it got closed down as well after the first day because his daughter gets scooped. We then have the events of FNAF 4 when Crying Child is having his birthday at Freddy's come the end of the week. When he gets there though, he's scared because he watched his sister get scooped, and then he ends up getting shoved into Fredbear's mouth and put in a coma. After fighting through a nightmare trying to stay alive, William pulls the plug and promises to put him back together. It's another question if he actually does though. Crying Child dies and then probably goes on to possess his father as the one you should not have killed. Next we have Into the Pit in 1985. And while this next moment in the timeline isn't a part of the games, it's an important moment because it's the moment time travel, like real actual time travel, is introduced into the series through a ball pit of all places. This is the half of the story that takes place in 1985 before the missing children's incident, where Oswald is jumping in and out of the ball pit to play with his new friends Chip and Mike, who are around his age, which is around 11. But one day when he comes out of the ball pit, he hears screaming and ends up being lured into a room with 6 dead kids, a representation for Charlie, Gabriel, Fritz, Jeremy, Susie, and Cassidy. He then runs into the ball pit to return to his current year in order to escape Spring Bonnie. Then we have FNAF 2 in 1987. Thanks to the date we see on the paychecks we get at the end of the game, we know this to be true. This is after the missing children's incident, but the year of the bite of 87, which is when presumably the night guard Jeremy gets his frontal lobe bitten off and then gets promoted to the day shift, which is where we come in. This is the grand reopening after the 1985 fiasco that resulted in the restaurant closing its doors, as we see in the news clippings from FNAF 1, and is when the toy animatronics are created and used, installed with a criminal database in an effort to prevent another incident from occurring. Whether they actually have these things or are just said to have them for parents to feel better is one question, but even if they did have them, we know that William is the suit technician, meaning that if they did have a database, he'd have programmed it and certainly would not include himself. At this point we see another set of killings and the toy animatronics get scrapped, whereas the withered ones, which were the original animatronics that got the kids stuffed inside them 2 years prior, are sent out to be repaired and sent to a new, smaller location. This location runs for a few years before FNAF 1 in 1993. FNAF 1, while being the first game ever released, does not take place first in the timeline. If only it were that clean. Instead, it takes place in 1993 or around then, based on minimum wage calculations MatPat did in his first ever FNAF theory, and Scott pretty much confirming this to be correct. We can also look at the Faz facts presented in FNAF AR's files that say, quote, in 1993, the most dangerous profession in the United States was actually night security guard, which seems to indicate that the first game takes place in 1993, since we know the dates of the other games where we're actually security guards. This is also in line with the Nathan Dunlap story MatPat believed the first game to be based off of, however that could also be a coincidence. This is where we see the original 5 animatronics repaired after FNAF 2's location closed, and seemingly the first game where we play as Michael Afton, since at this point he'd be old enough to hold down a full-time job, being around 21 years old if we go off his character and Into the Pit. Speaking of which, that's our next stop. Into the Pit in 2011. Into the Pit is a difficult story to place timeline-wise, other than the part that takes place in 85. So how am I certain it takes place in 2011? Well, when Oswald is describing the town in the first few pages of the story, he says that the town went downhill after the mill had closed down. So I looked into towns that went downhill after some form of mill shut down that fit other requirements that he had listed. It had to have a movie theater like Oswald said his town did, and it had to still have a population despite being mostly run down. And the closest one that I could actually find was Scotia, California, whose Pacific Lumber Company closed in 2008 and was founded in 1863, meaning it would certainly be around for 1985 when the town is thriving, as we see in the story. And since Oswald also notes that 3 years ago is when the mill closed down, when he was 8, we can reasonably assume that since Pacific Lumber closed in 2008 that he was born in 2000 and is 11 years old at the time of the story, since it's 3 years after they closed. The population of Scotia is also only 850, which also would fit the story. story. Now this is important because of where the timeline goes next and how time travel could actually be involved. It also gives us an age for Mike, who, based on the kid from 1985's part of the story, was around Oswald's age that year, and considering how Crying Child died in 1983, 2 years before that part, it would most likely be the older brother who'd be 11 at that time, which also fits since he's wearing a hat and participating at a Freddy's, which the teen would really not want to do. Then we have FNAF AR in 2021. Okay, so based on dates that we can see on various emails from FNAF AR, which is where most of the lore resides in this game, the events of Special Delivery actually take place in 2021, this year, which is honestly really messed up for the timeline. I went into this wanting to see how long they'd have to hold on to the toy animatronics to see if they could be the basis for the Glamrock animatronics, yet I found out that FNAF AR takes place in 2021, meaning one of 4 things. Ness could not be Vanny, since Glitch Trap hasn't been created yet, since William hasn't even been found in the back room of Fazbear's Fright. 2, that the AR game is simply not canon to the story, which throws out all the fast facts and the emails as actual lore. 3, that Glitch Trap is able to time travel thanks to being present in technology or something similar like the ball pit from Into the Pit, which is possible since we know that time travel is possible in this universe, which is why I included Into the Pit in this video in the first place. Or 4, that Vanny isn't possessed by Glitch Trap and isn't a reluctant follower after all, and is instead a copycat. We can't know for sure which of these are the case until Security Breach actually comes out, and honestly that could ruin this whole video, but if we run on the assumption that Ness is Vanessa, aka Vanny, then Security Breach would also take place in 2021, if the FNAF AR emails match with the events of the games at least, meaning that somehow Vanny got possessed by Glitch Trap before he was ever created. If this game does not take place in 2021, however, we can rework this yet again come the game's release, but at this point, all we've got to go off of is the FNAF AR emails, which seem to indicate this. This could also cause issues like if Springtrap isn't going to be discovered for another couple of years, why are there versions of him being released to the public in FNAF AR? Because, like, they wouldn't know that he existed yet, right? A simple explanation to that is that they just found Springtrap before the events of FNAF 3, yet if this game does take place in 2021, it is actually possible for Vanessa to be a secret 4th Afton kid because they'd be the proper age and they do have a striking resemblance to Elizabeth. Next we have FNAF in 2023. FNAF 3 may also not have a simple timeline placement, however, the game description places it 30 years after Freddy Fazbear's closes, and the most recent closure we've seen would be the FNAF 1 closure in 1993, which would place FNAF 3 in 2023, which hasn't even happened in real life yet, so maybe we'll get a real Freddy Fazbear's for ourselves. This is when Springtrap is released in a new horror-themed Freddy's location called Fazbear's Fright, with seemingly no connection to the books, and is the company's first attempt at repairing their reputation by leaning into the horror genre. However, Henry ends up burning this place to the ground with William inside as well as the puppet, as we can see on a rare screen, except it doesn't work and William survives, because of course he does. This is also where we learn that the spirits of the original 5 missing children were put to rest in the Happiest Day minigame, which we must complete as Henry, based on Orville Elephant's dialogue in Ultimate Custom Night, and the secret final cutscene of Sister Location that shows down burnt Fazbear's Fright. Next up we have Sister Location, which is also most likely happening in 2023. Sister Location also probably takes place around the same time. We know at the very least it has to, thanks to that ending I mentioned moments ago, where Michael is describing how he's going to come find his father, where we see a burnt down Fazbear's Fright and Springtrap popping up from its ruins. This means that the game must happen at least at the same time, since at the moment of this line he hadn't found his father yet, which also means that we couldn't have played as Mike in FNAF 3 because he wouldn't be saying that he's going to come find you, because he already would have. This could be a flash forward, but I don't think that that could be the case, since at that point he'd be purple and smelling horrible, and if people are running away from him scared on the street when he's walking, how would they hire him to be the night guard at a Freddy's joint? Like, even if it is horror themed, he's there after hours and doesn't need to look the part. So the most likely scenario is that after William was released, he somehow instructed Michael to go find his sister. Or Baby actually ended up mimicking William in order to lure Mike down there, since she knew he wouldn't die and Ennard would be able to use him as a skin suit. Either way, it makes the most sense for the events of the main game of Sister Location to take place in 2023, whereas the events of the 8-bit sections take place before 1983, which are also the earliest moments we've seen in the series. Then we have FNAF 6, which takes place sometime after 2023. Now, I've had a hard time placing FNAF 6's exact time, I have yet to find that smoking gun that gives me how many years after 2023 the game takes place, yet we know it has to take place after 2023 for various reasons. 1. The inclusion of Scraptrap. Whether it's a more deformed Springtrap suit or a new one altogether, William wasn't released until 2023, so it has to be after. 2. Scrap Baby. Baby gets kicked out of the Ender tribe between games in the source code for Scott's website, meaning that it has to take place after Sister Location, which seems to also happen in 2023. 3. The appearance of the Paper Pals, who made their debut in FNAF 3. 4. The appearance of both Henry and Mike, who decide to stay while the building is burning. And 5. Lefty, who was created to keep the puppet in that location so Charlie would actually be set free, since the puppet also escaped in FNAF 3 or was never there to begin with, which made Henry sure that it would be there this time. This is where we see the story attempt to be put to rest, with Baby, the puppet, Molten Freddy, who is a combination of all the Funtime animatronics, and Scraptrap all burning. But we know that William as Scraptrap escapes, even if horrifically burned by the fire, removing the entire Scraptrap suit and landing him in the hospital in a coma. That's where Ultimate Custom Night takes place, after the FNAF 6 fire. Ultimate Custom Night must take place after the FNAF 6 fire because it takes place in William's head, much like how FNAF 4 was in the Crying Child's head. Another reason I believe Crying Child to be the one you should not have killed. In addition to that, we see characters that made their first appearance in FNAF 6 present to torment William in Ultimate Custom Night, most notably the Rockstar animatronics and the mediocre melodies. This is also where we learn that Henry was the one who tried to release the original 5 missing children, thanks to Orville Elephant saying, quote, "He tried to release you, he tried to release us." However, running alongside this are the events prior to the Fazbear Fright story, The Man in Room 1280, which shows us what it's like in the real world during the events of Ultimate Custom Night. Since we're told that William has been there years prior to the story starting, this means that he's being tortured by the one you should not have killed for at least 2 years, as we learn, since he had, quote, been taken off life support years ago. While it could be more than 2, it has to at least be a couple years since the word years is in plural. And then finally, we have FNAF VR, which takes place at least 4 years after FNAF 6 and 2 years after William was taken off life support, since the priest who shows up in The Man in Room 1280 to read him his last rites was asked to do so again, quote, years after he was taken off life support, notice the plural, which happened at least 2 years after the FNAF 6 fire. At this point, if FNAF 3, 6, and 7 all take place one after each other, we'd be in 2027 at the very least. And we know that this game has to take place after FNAF 6 and The Man in Room 1280 thanks to the appearance of Glitchtrap, who appeared by scanning a circuit board to help create the AI, and Helpy, who makes an appearance as an Easter egg character and a main character in the Curse of Dreadbear DLC. Helpy was introduced in FNAF 6, so it has to at least come after that, and we see the circuit board be created in The Man in Room 1280 when the priest brings William to a Fazbear Entertainment warehouse where he promptly explodes, meaning at the very least FNAF VR takes place in 2027, which is 6 years after FNAF AR and probably Security Breach, which begs the question, since William only becomes Glitchtrap 6 years after Ness is acting weird, as if she is possessed, this seems to be impossible unless Ness isn't possessed, isn't Vanny, or Glitchtrap is somehow able to time travel. But has time travel been established in the games? Actually, it might have been. See, one Twitter user pointed out to me that the animatronic arm we see at the end of the Security Breach gameplay trailer looks an awful lot like Nightmare Freddy's arm. And if that is the case, firstly it would require the Nightmare animatronics to have some real physical forms, unless they're doing some dream hopping, but it would also require time travel, since FNAF 4 is the first game in the timeline, taking place in 1983, 38 years before the earliest events of Security Breach if it does take place in 2021, which it seems to. Huh. Interesting.
Number 10. Vanny killed Foxy. What if Vanny was actually the one to get rid of certain animatronics? Why? Well, it could be because she's looking for the perfect host for her master, Glitchtrap, aka William Afton's new body. Some have theorized that William Afton will be returning not in human form, but in the much more indestructible and immortal form of an animatronic. Indestructible. Perhaps Foxy is involved in this process, or perhaps Vanny has taken and harvested Foxy for spare parts to build a new and improved form for her master. I kinda hope it's like a new animatronic, because I think that would be really cool. Number 9. Roxanne and Foxy team up. Some believe that Roxanne and Foxy are in cahoots, and it's actually through her appearance that we will get to see Foxy as well. What are Roxanne and Foxy up to is the question. Why do they need to team up? It could be that the animatronics are still competing to catch Gregory, and Foxy will show up to help Roxanne in her time of need. If this is true, do you think Roxanne will be more or less successful because of Foxy's help? Could Foxy perhaps not be willing to help Roxanne and be forced to team up with her under duress? Is it possible that Foxy is being held captive and this team up isn't something that they're really willing to do? Or could it just be that Foxy decided to take a back seat to let his friend Roxanne shine bright in the spotlight? Maybe that's why Foxy just like retired from the music career and was like, Roxanne, you got it, girl. Number 8. The competition. Alternatively, what if Roxanne actually got rid of Foxy? She could have started out as more of a background character at Freddy's Mega Pizzaplex, and perhaps it was due to jealousy that Foxy disappeared. Instead of it being a corporate decision, perhaps the Foxy animatronic just one day went missing, which prompted Roxanne to get a promotion. Oh, how convenient. This could very well mean that there is, or at least was, a Glamrock Foxy. Perhaps instead of seeing Glamrock Foxy whole in this game, we will only learn of what happened to him via the story in the game, and instead find his spare parts and remains, which Roxanne attempted to dispose of. I'm just saying, if you get to take a close look at Roxanne's area in the Pizzaplex, which I think we will get to do, maybe look out for any tufts of fur or like a bedazzled eye patch that could be hidden somewhere nearby. It was Roxanne. Roxanne murdered Foxy. And friends, before we move on to the next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists about Security Breach or more lists about Foxy, be sure to let us know in the comments below and hit that thumbs up. Every time you hit that thumbs up, it just means that we get closer to Security Breach. I can hear Steel Wool being like, it's almost coming out, hit like more. Number 7. 80s connection. While many people often point to the fact that Security Breach is meant to take place in the modern day and Crying Child was around in the 80s and 70s, you know, living his life, doing his thing, this doesn't actually disprove anything. Now, there are two ways that this could be dealt with. Either Security Breach, with its very 80s motif, isn't really set in the modern day, as we've been led to believe. Or, you know, time travel is a thing, and maybe Gregory is the Crying Child but simply time traveled, perhaps through the ball pit, from the 80s Fazbear establishment to the modern day one, the Mega Pizzaplex. I'm just saying that's a lot of 80s styling that we have in this game. Perhaps too much 80s style for it to be considered modern day. I remember when this game was first announced, we were like seeing some of the images from it, I was like, I feel like that's gonna be in the 80s. And everyone's like, no, it's modern day, Amanda, it's modern day. And I'm like, really? Because I feel like, I know 80s is trendy right now, but I don't know. I'm just saying, if it ends up being in the 80s, that's what I was thinking. Number 6. Love affair. A lot of people have noticed just how similar Roxanne and Foxy seem to look, which has many fans theorizing about if the pair could actually be related somehow. Granted, Foxy is a fox and Roxanne is a wolf, but they are similar enough that some think that Roxanne might actually be the reason for both Foxy and Bonnie's potential absence in Security Breach. This is because they believe that Roxanne is actually the child of Foxy and Bonnie, who are in love with each other. I mean, this is the internet and this is FNAF, so any relationship mashups could of course be possible and likely have been shipped somewhere out on the internet and have countless fans of them. I personally think if Roxanne is their offspring together, that it might actually make sense that they don't appear. I'm not sure how in love Foxy and Bonnie were or are, but in the technical sense, this makes sense. Roxanne may have actually been built from Bonnie and Foxy's spare parts, being their child in the sense that she was made from them, born of them, if you will. However, that would also mean that we definitely won't be seeing Foxy in this game, as the animatronic would have had to give up its own existence to give life to Roxanne. Number 5. Obey. One theory when it comes to the Obey poster featuring Vanny is that Vanny is actually trying to urge Gregory to obey her, and that's what's happening in the poster and in the game. The game starts off with us playing as Gregory witnessing something really bad happening, perhaps Vanny killing someone. We go to run away, but Vanny urges us instead to come to her, and hence the chase begins. However, it is possible that Obey could pertain to Vanny's role in the game, in the sense that she is serving someone else and is being being forced to obey their orders. It could symbolize that Vanny is the one who needs to be or will be obedient in the game in terms of her role as a follower of Glitchtrap, aka William Afton. Number 4. Modded Foxy. What if Roxanne wasn't always Roxanne, but was instead Foxy but heavily modded? After all, initially when we were looking at silhouettes, we all thought that Roxanne was going to be Foxy, and the fact that Foxy is missing in the Security Breach lineup seems to suggest that Foxy might actually indeed just be Roxanne. Or rather, Roxanne is instead a super modded Foxy? But why? Well, this could be due to Freddy's just wanting to refresh with branding, or simply not liking the overall design of Foxy and wanting to change it because they felt it was too, I don't know, outdated? Me, I think pirates will always be cool, but perhaps not everybody at Fazbear Entertainment who works in branding and marketing shares my love of all things pirate forever. Yar. Number 3. The parallels continue. The crazy thing is that the FNAF 4 connections don't really end there with the whole child protagonist part. Not only is Security Breach the only other game with a child protagonist in the franchise thus far, but the stories even overlap somewhat in terms of broad strokes. Both seemingly center around a child who experiences some kind of horror or trauma, ruining a family-friendly place they initially loved. Both also have a child protagonist who is guided or aided in some way by a bear figure who seems to understand the situation that said protagonist is dealing with. Some also think that the purple animatronic hand we see in the trailer that is claw-like resembles the look of a nightmare animatronic, and some also see parallels between how Vanessa and psychic friend Fredbear both seem to try and comfort the protagonist in their respective games. Number 2. Bite of 87. The Bite of 87 is still a hot debate topic amongst FNAF fans. We don't really know who is behind it. Many have speculated, however, that Foxy makes a lot of sense as a prime suspect. 1. He's got super sharp teeth, which instantly makes him suspicious, and 2. He also seems to be off to the side when we see him in the first game, with his own Pirate's Cove kinda like out of order. Why is this? Could it be because Foxy was responsible for the Bite of 87? And if Security Breach is later in the timeline, is it possible that Foxy was taken out of the group, thrown away, and eliminated because he was the one behind the bite? Which would make sense. They'd be like, we don't want animatronics that bite people. We also don't want bunny animatronics because all the murders. Number 1. Foxy has left the chat. Of course, one of the most scary theories that I can think of for Foxy in regards to Security Breach is that my favorite animatronic will not be appearing there. Sure, there is definitely going to be Glamrock Chica, who I also love dearly, but Foxy is honestly my favorite animatronic, and I think Foxy is also a favorite animatronic for many other fans out there too. So this would definitely be a travesty were it to be true. The reality is we really haven't seen anything in the trailer to suggest that Foxy will most definitely be appearing. All in all, he's been pretty absent. And while Roxanne is cool, not having Foxy in this game would be completely depressing and horrifying as a fan. Only time will tell, however, and hopefully we will get at least a very small hint of Foxy somewhere, at least a little Easter egg, please. At the very least, I just want something on the same level as Bonnie Bowl, in case that's all we also get of Bonnie. I don't know what it would be for Foxy. What I really want is I want a place where you can like polish hooks and buy hooks, but I don't know why I want that. It's not like a fun thing you would do at an arcade. It's just a weird thing that I associate with Foxy.
Now, just to go over things first, what was my original timeline proposed in that last theory? Well, it starts with FNAF 4 in 1983 that we see thanks to the TV in Crying Child's house. Then we see the 1985 part of Into the Pit, followed by FNAF 2 and Freddy Fazbear's grand reopening in 1987. FNAF 1 takes place after that in 1993, calculated by Matt Patton in his first theory video, as well as being confirmed by a Faz fact from FNAF AR. Then comes Into the Pit with the present day, at least the present day in the book, and I'm including Into the Pit because time travel would technically be required, and Into the Pit is what introduces time travel. And then we run into FNAF AR. Now, the FNAF AR emails have dates ranging the game from 2019 to 2021, which I'm guessing is dependent on when you are actually playing the game, since it's meant to be the present day. And since Security Breach is linked to special delivery via those emails and Ness along with the other weird happenings, we can reasonably assume that Security Breach would come next. Then we have to fast forward 2 years and see FNAF 3 with the Fazbear Frights attraction and sister location happening simultaneously thanks to the secret sister location ending. And to end the current timeline, we have FNAF 6, Ultimate Custom Night, and VR happening one after each other. However, we only know that FNAF VR takes place at least 4 years after FNAF 6 thanks to the Man in Room 1280 from Bunny Call, the most controversial point in this timeline being FNAF 3 taking place after Security Breach and AR, which a lot of people seem to have issues with. Obviously, there are some discrepancies that need to be made when talking about the FNAF timeline, since as Scott sees the story play out in his mind, previous moments may not align to a perfect fit, so information that is revealed later should be taken as a priority, like MatPat stated in his most recent timeline video after Ultimate Custom Night's release. So they didn't find Springtrap until night 2 of FNAF 3 would have to be replaced with them discovering Springtrap sooner than we thought, but only releasing him later on while trying to test to make sure everything was working before opening Fazbear's Fright, so that he could then appear as a character in Special Delivery, maybe perhaps as a way to hype up the actual location. But there's another problem that I want to address, saying that we have seen a Spring Bonnie time travel before, like in Into the Pit, so time travel is not out of the question for this scenario. There also seem to be quite a few people who believe that FNAF 3 takes place in 2013, since we know that the FNAF 4 location closed thanks to Crying Child getting chomped, so 30 years after 1983 would be 2013. However, the description for FNAF 3 states that, quote, 30 years after Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed its doors, the events that took place there have become nothing more than a rumor and a childhood memory, meaning that the establishment was indeed called Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and to our understanding, that bite incident from FNAF 4 actually took place in Fredbear's Family Diner, thanks to the limited number of animatronics as well as them both being gold. While yes, other Freddy Fazbear's locations at this time were open, this incident did not occur at one, and this begs the question, does FNAF 3 rather take place in 2017, after the FNAF 2 location closes? Well, if we look back at that quote again, we know that that's not the case, since it says itself that, quote, the events that took place there have become nothing more than a rumor and a childhood memory, which couldn't be the case given that the FNAF 1 location that takes place in 1993 wouldn't be open if that's really what happened. If the 1987 location was the last one to close, it would make sense, but there being another Freddy Fazbear's open in 1993 means that the tragedies have not yet become a distant memory, especially since they're posting news clippings about the original incidents on the walls. And even if we didn't put them there, someone else is posting them on the wall as a prank. Sure, the hallucinations may be what causes them to change, but they're not the reason they're actually on the wall. We can still see the articles when we aren't hallucinating anyways, like in the first few nights. So why do I think that FNAF 3 has to take place after Security Breach? Because there seems to be a lot going on. Hell, what I'm saying now could even be pointing towards Security Breach taking place in the 80s if you look at it a certain way, since thanks to Montgomery Gator we have all the proof we need. Take a look at the characters in the background of the Happiest Day minigame from FNAF 3, the ones in color at least. They have various different masks on that are each pretty much explained away thanks to the mediocre melodies introduced in FNAF 6, Pig Patch, Orville Elephant, and the Hippo guy. However, there are a couple outliers even with these other animatronics. The first one being the very first guy on this lineup who's wearing a green mask, which absolutely could be referring to Happy Frog, but that doesn't look like a freaking frog to me. Are you kidding? Frogs don't have those kind of faces. Even animatronic ones would not have a snout that goddamn long. A frog's face does not come out to here, people, okay? You know what does though? Alligators. And who do we see in Security Breach? A green alligator with a long snout. Who else do we see? A wolf who maybe seems to be the same color that Bonnie was, which as we learn is supposed to be blue despite looking purple. And what other mask do we see that doesn't have a mediocre melodies equivalent? A blue mask with a snout like a wolf would have. Interesting. So, are the two new main lineup animatronics actually present in the Happiest Day minigame? We can't say for certain after all because these are 8-bit, but it certainly makes a hell of a lot more sense now, right? Plus I don't care if it's a robotic frog or not, okay? No frog is going to have that freaking snout, okay? It's not gonna be out here and it's not gonna be this thin, okay? That's an alligator.
Number 10, be our guest. We are used to animatronics being more in a performance role when it comes to their presence at the various FNAF restaurants and properties. But what if instead they're in a more active role throughout the Mega Pizzaplex? This is a theory based on the fact that Bonnie doesn't actually appear as an active animatronic in the trailer, but does appear as a mascot of the bowling alley named Bonnie's Bowl. And it also comes from evidence of there being multiple new animatronics that seemingly aren't part of the main show cast. What if all these extra animatronics aren't performers but instead are programmed to help you in various interactions, serving guests and possibly making sure that they're having fun at the Pizzaplex even while not necessarily performing for them? That would likely create more problems for you attempting to evade them at night. 1980 something? Would this be scary? I don't know. I guess if you being misled dramatically is scary to you. I think that's a legitimate fear though for FNAF fans. After all, we think we have it all figured out, that we've followed the clues successfully, connected all the dots, and then it couldn't turn out to be wrong. Well, it's pretty embarrassing. And it's scary to be wrong and be embarrassed. However, that's why we should also consider the possibility that security breach doesn't actually take place in the modern day, like we've been led to believe, but instead takes place in the time it appears to be in from a visual standpoint, the 80s. If this is true, it means so many of the clues that we thought applied here don't, and could even mean that parts of the main plot we thought we knew were actually wrong. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more security breach theories as we count down the days till this game will be released, I'm thinking December, then be sure to let us know you love this list by giving it a thumbs up. Number 8. Time travel. One of the scariest theories for us content creators who talk about FNAF non-stop is time travel being introduced in Security Breach. This would add a whole other layer of complication to the world of FNAF, but then again it could also help to clean up some potential plot holes in regards to our timeline. It's theorized that time travel could be introduced because of the presence of the ball pit in the trailer. Now, the only other ball pit that seems to have shown up or be relevant at all within this franchise is the one from the Fazbear Frights books, which of course was a time traveling ball pit. So while that doesn't mean that the one seen in the game will be a time traveling ball pit, it does make a lot of people wonder. I'm just saying, you see a ball pit, the only other one you've seen is a time traveling ball pit. Odds are good, we're gonna time travel in it. Number 7. Friends at Last. Of course, being a big Foxy fan, you know I want this to happen. I want it to happen so bad. Perhaps Foxy is not featured in the trailer but is present in the game as an ally to us, which might explain their lack of appearance there. After all, we don't want to spoil it if animatronics can be our allies in the game, which has already kind of been hinted at perhaps with Montgomery Gator. And perhaps all the parts with Foxy in the game would make that way too obvious. It has been theorized before that some of the animatronics may provide a hiding spot for Gregory, allowing him to move around inside the animatronic and go undetected. Some think one or many of these animatronics could be helping you. What if one of them is Foxy? Foxy could be hiding behind the scenes or have his own special area that he's relegated to that we just haven't seen yet. And Foxy could very well be an animatronic that simply isn't chasing us, but is actually, for reals this time, finally our friend. Finally just coming to check in on us. Number 6. Hide inside. Based on our experiences in Sister Location, the idea of this theory being true is all in all pretty terrifying. The idea here is of course that we as the player, acting as the protagonist in the game, are forced to, or for some reason choose to, move around the Mega Pizzaplex but inside an animatronic. Basically wearing an animatronic suit, which I guess must be a spring lock suit or some other wearable variation. After all, if this game does take place in the future or the present day, you'd think they might have updated that tech a little bit, considering, you know, the awful track record that spring lock suits have had in the history of Fazbear Entertainment and beyond that. The theory that we might be actually wearing a suit comes from stills and shots which feature the inside of what looks like to be Montgomery Gator's mouth, where the angle seems to imply that our view is from within the suit and not just, you know, us looking through a mouth-shaped part of the decor in the Pizzaplex. Although that's another theory. Is it decor or is it a suit? You decide. Number 5. Robo-Children. If Michael is actually a realistic humanoid animatronic of some kind, and if Michael and Crying Child happen to be separate children and separate entities, what would stop Crying Child from returning as an animatronic? In fact, it is possible that William rebuilt Crying Child as an animatronic, but that Robo-CC escaped his father and so he simply made Michael from scratch to replace Crying Child. Or perhaps none of these children were ever real, Elizabeth included, and they're all all animatronics and have been since day one, and Crying Child just was an animatronic child that ran away. It would make sense considering the mystery of Mrs. Afton continues to go unresolved, and since I'm not really sure who would let someone as strange as William Afton adopt kids. I mean, I guess he wasn't always so strange. Perhaps before the killings he was like a super responsible parent and people were like, yeah, you should totally have kids. You seem like a real nice guy, William Afton. Anyways, if Robo-CC was a thing and then that animatronic escaped, is it possible that even if we are in the modern day with Security Breach, that Gregory is that animatronic? Because after all, if he was an animatronic, then he wouldn't age, right? After all, we saw in the Silver Eyes trilogy a similar scenario where Charlie learned she was one of a few different animatronic versions of the real life Charlie that were made by Henry after he lost his flesh and blood daughter and also lost his mind. Is it possible that this story serves to lay the groundwork for what is going on here with Gregory, possibly being a robotic version of the Crying Child? And if so, perhaps he came to the Mega Pizzaplex on purpose. Perhaps he is here to end his father, William Afton, for good. Maybe it's William that should be afraid of Gregory, I don't know. Number 4. Return of Glitch Trap. This is something pretty much everyone thinks is going to happen. And I mean, if you don't think it's going to happen, please make your thoughts and reasoning known in the comments below. I would honestly love to hear from you. For the most part though, I think many of us are expecting Glitch Trap to show up in some form. This is because of the narrative from Help Wanted and his appearance there. It also seems like Vanny, his reluctant follower, will be making an appearance based on the trailer. So a lot of us are theorizing where there is a Vanny, there is a Glitch Trap, and that Vanny will be working for Glitch Trap in this game, and perhaps less reluctantly this time around. Number 3. Inspired by. What if we have this all backwards? What if instead of Foxy being modded into a Roxanne, Roxanne was actually the inspiration for Foxy? We all believe we know that this game takes place and that it is set more in the present day. But this could just be a red herring. After all, you can't ignore the extremely 80s theme of this game's aesthetic. What if Security Breach is actually set in the 1980s? Is it possible then that Roxanne could be the earlier incarnation of Foxy, the animatronic who actually inspired everyone's favorite fox? This timeline, after all, is pretty wonky for FNAF, and we know there wasn't a Foxy at Fredbear's. Is Freddy's Mega Pizzaplex then potentially a location that existed on the timeline between Fredbear's and Freddy's? Could it possibly have existed prior to Foxy's creation? I mean, it seems unlikely, but it could be possible. I'm just saying. Number 2. Vanny is Vanessa. One of the most frightening moments for me amidst all the games so far is the one where Circus Baby reveals herself to be a traitor in the scooping room and ends up scooping you. That is some strong nightmare fuel, that whole moment. Likewise, I think one of the scariest things that will happen in this game will be when it is revealed that Vanessa, the security guard seemingly trying to help us escape, is actually Vanny, the person who has been chasing us as Gregory all along. Dun dun dun! The real question is, why the charade? Why the game? Is it that Vanny is a split persona of Vanessa's, and that Vanessa is actually trying to fight against this darker side of herself, whom she has less control over? Despite the fact that this theory is so popular, even if it does prove to be true, there could still be many surprises for us along the way involving this grand reveal. So if you think you've figured this one out, don't think that it's going to detract from the game, because I'm sure there's going to be some things that we didn't figure out even about this theory, if it's right. And it could still be wrong. Number 1. Gregory is Crying Child. Okay, so this one might be a little far out there for some of you, but I also believe that it could very well be true. Honestly, when I figured this one out, I had a little light bulb moment and I was like, could that be a thing? Why not? Anything's possible if you believe. It would take a lot of other theories though to be wrong, but I do think that some of these theories have been teased at by the game and clues we've been given in order to actually throw us off the scent of what's really going on here. That doesn't mean that clues won't still somehow be relevant at some point, but simply that we just don't have all the pieces of the puzzle just yet. So in other words, we're trying to put pieces in where maybe they don't really fit. If the game is set in the 80s like we suspect, it is possible that Crying Child could actually be Gregory. I know some fans think that the name for Crying Child was found in the logbook and that it is Evan, and others have theorized that Cece and Michael are actually one and the same. So CC is Michael. But what if we're wrong about those theories and those names? What if Gregory is the victim that we know as Crying Child, and we're actually going to witness the beginning of this character's trauma? After all, another interesting indicator is that Toy Chica has no beak here, or well, Glamrock Chica has no beak here. What if this is actually the beginning of Toy Chica? What if Toy Chica wasn't actually made to be Glamrock Chica later on, but it was the other way around? What if Glamrock Chica becomes Toy Chica, and this is where the beak gets lost and then regiven? You know what I'm saying? I don't know. I feel like a lot of people are gonna think I'm crazy for saying that, but I think it could be true. And if it does turn out to be true, then hey, come back here and you can be like, you got it right, yay. Little celebrate emojis raining down.